Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a well-known and respected author from Seattle, USA, Lya Badgley. Lya, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you. Lya is an author of several books. She has a book titled The Foreigner's Confession, which is set in Cambodia. She has a book titled The Worth of a Ruby, set in Myanmar. And she has a forthcoming book, which is titled The 35th Page, which is set in Bosnia. And given the amount of work that she's been doing, understandably, she's been recognized and felicitated several times. So, Lya, you were born in Yangon to American parents. How did that multicultural start shape your worldview?
Gosh, what a great question. It certainly I have a different start than many Americans. I believe that being born in Yangon in particular gave me sort of this. I was raised with a deep sense and awareness of the world's multicultural aspects. I think that understanding that multiple perspectives can coexist, hopefully without conflict, shaped the way that I approach my life and my storytelling. And I always strive for curiosity, but also empathy.
Amazing. And how did your parents, one a political scientist, the other an artist, influence your path as a writer?
Well, they were both intellectuals
Mm-hmm.
who shared an intense curiosity, and they shared that curiosity with me about the world and about how people live in the world in the unique ways, and how we can respect that. And I think that I grew up with many challenging debates around the dinner table. And my father was a political scientist, and he ultimately got his doctorate at Johns Hopkins school here in the United States. And so he was the challenging one, but my mother taught me about beauty and how to find beauty everywhere, and in even the most humble of places. So I'm most grateful for them. They're both gone now, but I miss them all the time.
Fascinating. And from Seattle's music scene to covert missions in Southeast Asia, your life has been quite unconventional. How have these experiences fed into your writing?
Well, I for many years I was told that I should write a memoir because I have had been lucky, blessed, cursed, however you want to consider it, to have had these many adventures in my life. I think that basically I will settle on this comment for this is that living those kinds of extremes taught me about contrasts, and how to coexist with those contrasts simultaneously. You know, the yin and yang, if you will, the dark and the light. And I try to write in that Venn diagram, if you will, of the intersection of that tension, and that's what fuels me as a writer, I believe.
Amazing. And do you feel your artistic and your political sides ever come into a conflict when you write?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
Absolutely not. Art is politics.
Okay.
When we pick up a pencil, we
Yeah.
choose a color, and that's arguably a political act, potentially. So art is politics and should be, always is.
Absolutely. Art is politics, but is politics art?
Well, that depends on who you're talking to, and who's painting the poster.
I agree with you. So, Lya, moving on, when did you first know you wanted to be a novelist? And how did your experience as a videographer influence your storytelling style?
Well, so my foray into videography was, I guess you're referencing my bio here, was very short-lived.
Hmm.
I was doing a, how to say, I was working with Human Rights Watch in a part of the world where people like me didn't normally go. And I'm a klutz with technology, so I could never be a filmmaker.
Hmm.
Thankfully, my daughter has gone and you know, did get her degree in filmmaking, and she can handle that.
Hmm.
But I am a very visual person, and so I believe that framing a shot to take a photograph or to film is the same as framing a scene.
Hmm.
And for me, my writing is very, very visual. So I would say that's the corollary.
Hmm. And when did you first realize you wanted to be a novelist?
Oh gosh. Well, I've always been a storyteller, and I I was a songwriter in the music world here in Seattle in the 80s and early 90s, and so lyrics, you know, is a kind of storyteller, storytelling, and uses words, and then. I had health issues and I couldn't perform and tour anymore. So I started writing poetry. And I guess, as I've gotten old, I have more and more to say. So there are more and more
I
words.
agree.
So
That
the
I
books
agree.
get bigger and bigger.
Correct. I agree with you on that, absolutely. But as I was reading about you, I was fascinated to read that, or seem to understand that conflict seems to shape both the outer and inner worlds of your characters. Why is this intersection so powerful?
Well, I think I alluded to it earlier, you know, in that sort of that place where tension lives, that's reality, I believe. And I think that outer world is such a of an outer war, a zone or conflict zone or a place of disruption
Hmm.
is such a marvelous, well, not marvelous, but is such a perhaps accurate reflection of what happens internally in our hearts and in our souls, especially as women. And that can be a marvelous, not only a metaphor, but an actual reflection or a mirror of that conflict within. So, and I have happened to live in those places and work in those places, and for whatever reason, I end up there. So I'm drawn to it. I think that tension, that's very that's alive. I will never be comfortable in a so-called suburban
Hmm.
life.
Your work often explores grief, moral uncertainty, and meaning. Why are these themes so central to you?
Well, I write about grief and moral uncertainty a lot
Hmm.
because they're conditions that we all face, especially now in the world. Well, we always have in the world, right? There's nothing new about now. It's just
Hmm.
that we have better ways of shouting at one another and more platforms to shout at one another on. But for me, black and white isn't the whole story. And it's the shades of gray that make the painting, that make the film, that make the writing and the story more complex and interesting. And when we wrestle with that meaning, again, I keep getting back to that sort of tension of where what for me is very interesting, and that's what compels me as a storyteller.
Mm. And your protagonists typically evolve over the course of your stories. Tell me a little bit more about how this evolution happens as you write.
Well, I think that we would hope. I mean, most people read to see some kind of beginning and end point for the characters that you know they can root for, whether or not that they end up exactly where we would hope they would. I like to have ambiguous endings sometimes,
Mm.
but my protagonists begin with a burden. They
Mm.
begin with a wound. They're damaged either physically or emotionally,
Mm.
and that grief and that guilt and that past that they want to escape, so they're running away from it. And then over the course of the story, they have to confront the fact that they've only run away from themselves, and they have to confront those wounds for better or worse. And that's the transformation of my characters. Nothing unusual about it. I mean, it's classic stories.
Yeah, I agree. So let's talk about your book, The Foreigner's Confession, which is set in Cambodia. What was the spark that led to the story, and why did you choose Cambodia as the setting for your debut novel?
Well, from 1992 to 1993, I was the director of Cornell University's Cool Slang's archival project at the Museum of Genocide in Phnom Penh. And it's a long story how I came to be there, and maybe that's a topic for a different podcast. But the goal was to preserve and protect all extant materials of that former Khmer Rouge prison. So I worked every day alongside a local Cambodian staff of colleagues, microfilming that salvaged materials, which included booklets, all kinds of things. The photographs that now are associated with that museum, I found the negatives I found in a moldering heap. But the confessions. And so that experience, having come from that as being a silly rock and roll girl, to this was the first project that I'd ever done that was for something, my narcissistic self outside of that really completely fundamentally changed who I was. And I'm immensely proud of that work. And those reels, actually, that microfilm was fundamentally used as evidence in the crimes against humanity trials of some of those Khmer Rouge leaders. It's not. The Foreigner's Confession is not a story about me, but it is grounded in authentic experience and history of the things that I learned going to that former prison every day and working there and physically touching those documents.
Amazing. I visited that museum, and it is quite fascinating in Phnom Penh. Your next book was The Worth of a Ruby. And with this book, you returned to Myanmar. What made you want to tell this story?
Well, my connection to Myanmar runs very, very deep. As mentioned, I was born there, and some of my first memories are from there, of food, of language, of smells, that marvelous, sweet, sour tang of Southeast Asia, of jasmine and sewage. I mean, there's nothing like it. But one of my Burmese aunties told me that I must have been Burmese in my former life, just because, I learned the language and I speak the language and not as proficient as I used to be, but I try to keep up on it. But I returned there many, many times. I opened a restaurant there. I met my husband there, who was a diplomat for Avia, working in the embassy. And most recently, we went back in October. So we go back quite often. It is very painful what's happening there. And again, that's a conversation for another podcast. But in The Worth of a Ruby, I just wanted to explore how that complex country's history and politics shape people's everyday lives. And writing it was both a tribute to the country as well as a way of exploring how personal choices and the burdens that we carry from our childhood, again, getting back to that concept of wounds, can be reflected in the national struggles of the place.
Incredible, incredible. You mentioned magical realism in your work. How do you balance the mystical with the real?
Well, I grew up with parents who had a very unconventional spirituality. My father was a Baptist, my mother a Christian Zionist, and she later in her her last 10 years of her life identified as Hindu, and my father as agnostic. So that background makes magic realism feel very natural to me, and more natural than straight sort of normal kind of fiction. So I like to have an artifact in all of my stories that may or may not, depending on how we perceive our reality, be magical or not. So I balance the mystical with the real by grounding my stories in history and lived experience, and then allowing that mystical, those elements to sort of surface like ripples or bubbles beneath the surface.
Incredible. Your forthcoming book is titled The 35th Page. What does the title signify for you? And why have you set this in Bosnia?
Well, as mentioned, my husband is from former Yugoslavia. His family's originally from a part of Bosnia, and though he was born and grew up in Belgrade. So the Sarajevo Haggadah, one of the world's most famous medieval Sephardic manuscripts, is a real document. It has been written about before, has this very unusual sort of magical, if you will, history. And it has 34 pages of painted images that follow the Passover feast, the Jewish Passover feast. In my novel, a mysterious 35th page appears, and it might or might not carry the seeds for a curse of war. Now, as we know, the Balkans has been this grinding place between East and West for millennium, and always a place of conflict. So Bosnia felt like kind of a natural setting, because it's that place where history and folk tales and memory, all sort of mashed together. And as I mentioned, my husband's from there, so I have insider sort of knowledge about it, and he's taught me so easily how that past trauma can be inherited, and those seeds of violence which are planted so deeply. And I sort of speculate, are they actual seeds that is in the water, that is in the soil, so that the water we drink, the bread we grow, all of that, is that poisoning us with these seeds of violence? So anyway, so it's a little bit more than that, but I encourage people to check out my website to see more about the story. And the book will be released on October 28th.
Wonderful. Good luck with the release.
Thank you so
Two more
much.
questions for you, Lya. Do you see your books as preserving history as well as telling stories?
Oh, of course. So as we know, history is the story of the winners.
Correct.
And fiction allows the freedom to speculate and offer the stories of the people who weren't the winners. I mean, on this sort of like, basic, simplistic way of looking at it. But fiction allows us freedom to speculate.
Amazing. What moral questions do you find yourself returning to again and again as you research your books and as you look back at life?
Gosh, moral questions. Well, I'm intrigued by how ordinary people respond when caught in extraordinary circumstances, because I've come to believe in my relatively long life and in all of these wild and woolly places that I've lived, that each of us is capable of extraordinary things under the right conditions, that sometimes acts of cruelty, sometimes profound gestures of empathy. We're all capable of all of that. And that tension between that evil and empathy, light and shadow, is what I return to again and again in my books.
Amazing. I have time for two more questions for you, Lya. Have your books helped you process your own past in any way?
Oh yeah. I mean, I don't go to therapy. I write books.
Okay.
I think all creative people, hopefully all honest creative people, use their outlet in that way. And and so it's often a surprise after I write a book and after it's out in the world and I'm talking to people about it, when I suddenly go, oh, that's what that's about. I don't know when I start.
Yes, yes. And my last question for you, if you could have one message from your books remembered over the years, what would it be?
Gosh. Well, I would ask everyone to look in the mirror, because until we face the shadows in our own hearts, the worst is going to repeat itself over and over again. The path to a better world starts when we dare to look in the mirror.
Absolutely. Very, very well said. And on that note of look in the mirror, I was reminded of a comment my father told me, who was a retired brigadier general, he's no more, that every morning when you get up, you look at the mirror, and if you can look at yourself and say, yesterday I did not knowingly do anything wrong, that's the only justification you will ever need. But
and that was a good day.
Yeah. And this was such a powerful discussion with you. Thank you, Lya, for talking to me about your own incredible journey. Thank you for speaking to me about both your books and your forthcoming books. All the
Thank you
very
so
best
much. I've been honored. Thank you.
again. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.